I think that we need more transparency. I don't think it's a big ask. I think in the end, it will help Waymo get to be where they want to be. You can't say that you have a fully autonomous anything if you need even a modicum of human babysitting. But this is the deal breaker. If no company can get highway driving to work at scale, then it'll never work. And that's because even with operators in the United States, the time latencies there are still too long, and you cannot wait for a remote operator to do some kind of change of the vehicle at highway speeds. Somebody's going to die.
Dr. Missy Cummings is a professor and director of the Mason Autonomy and Robotics Center at George Mason University. Her research focuses on autonomous systems, human AI interaction, and the safety of AI in high risk, real world environments, including self driving vehicles. She is one of the first female fighter pilots in the U.S. Navy and previously served as senior safety advisor at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, where she worked on oversight and safety policy related to automated driving systems. Dr. Cummings, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat and dig into all things remote assistance, or should I say teleoperations? Well, I don't want to give away the whole podcast, but we'll be digging in today. And you just mentioned that you are based in Washington, D.C., because I have followed your work for a while, and I definitely always thought of you, as sort of more of a technical, obviously you're a professor at George Mason and your history in the Navy, which is very cool. How do you describe yourself? When people ask you, what you do as a professor, uh, industry expert, what do you think?
Well, I wear different hats.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of consulting with industry. And
Mm.
so when I wear that hat, I tell people in industry that I'm a tech realist. When I have my academic hat on, I'm a tech optimist, right?
Hmm.
Because I'm trying to raise money.
Hmm.
And so, I actually know where a lot of this comes from, where by this, I mean, people are overclaiming my technology can do X. I'm going to save the world with Y.
Yeah.
Look, I'm also guilty of that because that's what we do as professors. But I think one of the things that's happened in the last few years is that there's been a blurring of the line between your professor hat and the industry hat.
Hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of leakage on both sides.
Gotcha. And I mean, I think we also have to remember that all of these AV companies, I mean, talk about, startup and investors. I mean, they're at the kind of precipice of raising money. And I mean, I always joke that startups are basically kind of faking it until you make it, right? You have to tell this huge story of something that does not work right now, will work in the future. And, some people maybe take that too far, but that's kind of the business of startups and creating new products and new technology, right?
Sure. And, again, I tend to leave companies alone through about Series DE. And
Gotcha.
as soon as they get established, and by established, I mean they've got a clear runway, they've got many years in front of them.
Hmm.
And if they're starting to touch into operations that we could see people die in,
Mm.
that's when I show up. I mean, it's bad news. I just have to tell you,
Yeah.
like, bad news. If
Well,
I
I
start
think
picking on you, I think it's because I'm worried.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think any company that is affecting public safety, I don't know if it actually really matters what stage they're at. And I sort of jokingly say this a lot that, I just personally, like, I don't really care what people do in their own personal lives, but if it puts me at, if a drunk driver is on the streets and, putting me and my family at risk, that's when I have a big issue. If they want to go drive crazy in the middle of the desert and do stupid things and, hurt themselves, I don't really have a personal problem with that, but obviously everyone's different.
Yeah, but I think especially for many years, I just sat on the sidelines, and that's because Waymo and now Tesla with having a valet in the car,
Hmm.
when you have all these safety drivers in the car, you couldn't be more safe, right?
Yeah.
And so I just didn't bother them because I
Mm.
wanted to give them all the time and effort and
Yeah.
space to maneuver so that they could come up with a product. And I think that Waymo really, really can't stand me. And to be fair, if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't stand me either, except that, they should actually take this as a compliment. If
Yeah.
I'm in their knickers about their remote operations, it
Yeah.
means that they've done such a good job with the driving that we're talking about an issue that I really only reserve for relatively mature companies. Look,
Hmm.
Tesla is never going to be a self-driving car company. Never. We're never going to have this conversation seriously about them because they're just never going to get there. So I'm not worried about them in remote operations because they just aren't going to have the capability. But Waymo, if I'm worried about it, good. It means that they're actually in a space where, and I think this is very clear for Waymo.
Yeah.
This is a winnable situation. You just need to be more transparent, like you say you are, and start addressing this. I tell people you got to put your big boy pants on if you
Hmm.
want to be a big boy commercial
Yeah.
transportation company. You got to wear those big boy pants. So step up to the table.
Well, I think you and I definitely have shared some criticisms about Waymo when it comes to transparency, and I'm excited to dig into that and more today. So, I mean, I thought maybe, really why I wanted to bring you on was to talk about this remote assistance program that Waymo has now. Actually, maybe you will give them a little credit. They've been sharing some more details. Obviously, there's other terms like teleoperations. Maybe just start there. I mean, to me, I guess there's teleoperations and what Waymo calls remote assistance. Are those kind of the two big terms in your mind? And feel free to define them too, if you want to
Yeah,
briefly.
it's very confusing for everyone. And I've written about this before. I have another paper coming out very soon that really dives down deep and explains it to everybody so that they
Hmm.
can understand. We see two broad categories: remote assistance and remote driving. And I
Okay.
reserve the word teleoperation really for just remote driving because
Right.
in the world of robotics, teleoperation has been around since before I was born. That is
Hmm.
old. And that means that there's a person who is in a control center physically removed from the actual control of the
Hmm.
vehicle, and they're pushing, pulling levers, controls, dials, mechanisms, just in the way that we would if a person was in that place.
Got it.
So for the longest time, drones were teleoperated
Hmm.
by pilots, just like they were real planes. And this is actually what my new paper is about. It
Cool.
compares military drone operations to where we are in self-driving. And eventually they had to give that up because the latency was so bad. They
Okay.
crashed. We, the taxpayers, paid for so many millions of dollars of aircraft that it just became clear that they had to move to a remote assist paradigm instead of a remote teleoperation paradigm.
Gotcha. And in the autonomous vehicle context, teleoperations, I mean, there was a company, I went to Las Vegas and sat down in one of their consoles, VAY, you might be familiar with them, and they operate a service where the vehicles are driving around and they are, I'm not going to say teleoperated. I like that remote driving. I'll say they are remotely driven. So that would be one example of that use case, right?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know, how did it go? What did you
They
think?
wouldn't let, I asked if they would let me drive. They wouldn't let me drive. You might, we'll talk about training. So that was a good first step. They passed that. They wouldn't just let me come in off the street. And then I think the big topic as of late would be Waymo's term. And it sounds like I actually, I saw some people maybe not liking this term. I actually like the term remote assistance. I think it is very descriptive of what the Waymo person, wherever they're based, is doing, right? So remote assistance, how do you define that?
That's it is just what it sounds, that there's information that somebody who is external to the vehicle is providing the vehicle so that they can continue the dynamic driving task.
Got it.
Sometimes that information is information about a traffic light. That light is red,
Hmm.
that light is green. Sometimes a car can't understand a sign. What do I do?
Yeah.
And then the remote assistant will provide the instructions. Sometimes it's doing things called laying breadcrumbs. And it's where the operator will on the interface say, okay, car, you're stuck in this dead end.
Hmm.
I'm going to draw you a path on the road, and then you follow this path and get out the way you came.
Yeah. And by the nature of this type of assistance, I don't know, I won't say that it's not impossible, but you would imagine that it's typically for less dynamic situations and more static, right? I'm stuck at a light. I don't know what to do. Do you think that's fair?
Well, it's
We don't
I,
know, I
I
guess.
don't think that's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
and I agree. We don't have a full on knowledge, although I have
Hmm.
been in Waymo's remote operation center in Arizona. So I have been there. I've seen it personally.
Hmm. Well,
Uh,
they must like you a little if they let you into their
well,
remote operations center in
I was a
Arizona.
government regulator then. They had to like
Ah,
me.
okay. There you go. Well, maybe they didn't like you at then.
And to be fair, the thing is, I actually know a lot of people inside Waymo. I
Yeah.
graduate students that go work to Waymo. I think Waymo has done up to now a really great job. I think where they're really struggling is they're struggling to go from company that has matured somewhat to company that needs to be a professional outfit. And I think that they're having trouble bridging that gap.
Got
But the remote operations, even if it's remote assist, it is not as affected by time latency, but depending on the task, it is still affected by time latency. So
fair.
in the case of the lights, and this is where we've seen a crash,
Hmm.
a light, Waymo had gone into an intersection and Caltrans had moved a light
Hmm.
and it couldn't see the light anymore. There's a side lesson to be learned here is computer vision is terrible and
Hmm.
they had only moved it 6 inches.
Got
And
it.
because it had only moved 6 inches, it was invisible to the car's computer vision system. So it calls the operator and says, I expected to see a light. I don't see a light. What
But
color
where
is
is the car in this situation? Is it
the car? Is
stopped
trying to
or
make a left-hand turn. So
okay?
it's stopped making a left-hand turn.
Hmm.
So the operator sees it in the Philippines and
Hmm.
says, go. The operator saw that it had just
Mm.
turned yellow, but
Gotcha.
nobody in here that nobody has a screen anywhere that shows them what the average latency is. That would be
Mm.
one
Yeah,
interface design that I think Waymo is going to need to think about.
not a
And
bad idea.
so because of the time latency between here and the Philippines, by the time that the command made it back to the car, it had turned red and then Waymo turned on. So there was time
Right.
latency there. It wasn't
And
on
so
the
this,
when I
just
first
quickly, this situation I'm reading an article you shared with me from Brad Templeton on Forbes. Waymo runs a red light. It was March 2024. I'm not sure when the incident happened, but I'm guessing a little bit before then, just for
it's
timeline,
about a
right?
year before that.
Okay, got it. So even, oh wow, even so 2023. So
Yeah.
old days.
Well, the old days, but still days that
Yeah, on the
I mean,
streets and operating. Yeah.
you know, and this is why remote assistance is if it's truly car gets stuck in dead end cul-de-sac
Hmm.
and there's not a lot of people trying to get out for work, it's not
Yeah.
really that time critical right then and there.
It's annoying, but not safety
Yeah,
critical, maybe.
yeah, yeah. Car that actually gets stuck on the tracks, the Caltrain
Yeah.
train tracks. And in my new article that's coming out, oh boy, do they
Okay.
get stuck on
Hmm.
train tracks.
So I guess
And
that's a situation where latency, well, I mean, first of all, you want the driver to be really good, and that should never happen in the first place, I feel like. But if there was kind of a very time safety critical situation, you would want basically a remote assistance would be okay, but they need to be as close as possible to kind of make
yeah,
that decision.
and this is clear.
Yeah.
Uh, if you're in the United States, you don't experience it could be really anywhere in the contiguous United States, probably even Alaska, although I'd have to check the numbers. But as long as you're somewhere in the United States, you are not going to suffer any significant drop in latency that's going to be
Hmm.
noticeable to the system. I do think that Waymo is ultimately going to be headed there. I don't think that they appreciate what the headwinds are because the
Hmm.
headwinds are not only is there a clear safety argument for why the operator should be in the United States. If Waymo actually wants to be a commercial transportation outfit,
Hmm.
they do fall under DOT in terms of regulations, and these people do fall under their statute authority. They should be regulated by somebody in the
Yeah.
DOT. And last but not least, in recent news, I mean, I just had this discussion today with somebody from labor.
Hmm.
They aren't happy about that. And
Yeah.
there's going to be an election in less than a year, and then a little
I'll
less than three
I
years.
think yeah, we'll definitely I have a question in mind for you about that kind of general outsourcing of this type of role at this stage. But sticking on the latency, I guess from my own personal selfish knowledge, I mean, I read in Waymo's blog post that their median one-way latency is approximately 150 milliseconds for US-based operation centers and 250 milliseconds for remote assistance based abroad. Does that make sense to you?
It's disingenuous
Hmm.
to give you those numbers. I don't disagree with them, but the word median, so
Gotcha.
as a professor who teaches statistics, oh boy, do we love to lie with the word median.
Okay.
The word median is a way that's suggesting that I'm trying to cherry pick a number because I don't want you to either know the mean, and I definitely don't want you to know the standard deviation, and I
Right.
sure don't want you to know what the maximum latency is. And that's actually, a big
Fair.
issue. Again, Waymo needs to put their big boy pants on. When we talk about latency, it's never median, it's never mean, it's
Hmm.
always maximum.
Max. Yeah, no, that's fair. Because if that situation happens where you're in a, yellow light turning or, waiting at a light and you need that information and it's taking, 3 seconds to get to you, obviously that could be a pretty bad situation. And I think to sort of bolster your argument even further, I mean, Waymo just, they're announcing, okay, we're doing 500,000 trips a week now. And I always tell people, Uber is doing tens of millions of trips a day. And so if you have a 1 in a million situation, that's literally happening multiple times a day, right? So that max latency is a good point in that, even if it only happens 1 in a million, it might happen multiple times in a day or a month pretty quickly, right?
I feel I've converted you. So I feel like that my goals in coming on your podcast, I win.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, obviously, I think there's a lot of going on with this discussion right now. And so I think for me, it's sort of balancing, kind of the objective metrics, the examples of where, it might, come into play. And then, we might talk a little bit too about, actually implementing some of this. But I think that all makes sense. I mean, the latency. I mean, the other thing I noticed, maybe a kind of misconception with the way the Waymo driver works with remote assistance is that I don't know if Waymo actually, Waymo did call it phone a friend. I called it a backseat driver. I think to me, it seems like the Waymo driver is always in control, but the remote assistant can come in and give it a nudge or, advice, but it's still on the Waymo driver to decide is that good or bad advice. What do you think about that? I guess this red
Well,
light situation kind of it was a few years ago, but it kind of that was bad advice and it still did it, right?
right. So that's exactly right. So I think that it's nice to think that, but
Hmm.
there is some, there's got to be some effectively an override for it to actually even call and ask for advice, especially if it's asking for advice about how to actuate, how to move through the world.
Hmm.
Then that advice is just given a priority override. That's just the way that you do these communications queues is you have to actually get the command to
Right.
override other commands and go into the system. So, and you're in that dead zone of
Yeah.
like, I got to get in there at just the right time, or if the world changes, then it doesn't
Right.
match. And
I
so I
mean, if they're seeing some situation where, maybe similar to the SF blackout where, the light is not working and people are going and Waymo driver is saying, I've never seen this before. I'm not supposed to go. And the remote operator is saying, no, you really got to go. I guess like, how do they decide who's right?
well, I how this gets fixed is you take the remote operators out of the Philippines, you put them in the United States so that the latency, that
Okay.
time lag does not interfere. And that when the person says go, that
Hmm.
within 100 milliseconds, you're like, we're good.
They're
It's going to,
going.
yeah.
Got it. Okay, so that seems like, I guess, one solution. And so, I mean, I guess it sounds like you're okay with the idea of remote assistants, just want them to be onshore versus offshore.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm the queen of the of remote ops design. I mean,
Hmm.
I did this for the first part of my academic career, and actually
Yeah.
even when I was in the military. So yeah, you can't. Remote assist is a better way to direct these cars
Yeah.
because they're not as time critical.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand, and in fact, the paper that I'm getting ready to push out, it actually goes through all the design criteria. Like you
Hmm.
have to think about all of these things when you design these remote operation centers so that you end up not having some of the gaps that Waymo has.
Gotcha. So onshoring, much faster latency to avoid situations like this. I guess I don't know if Waymo would put it this way, but if I was making a simplistic argument from Waymo, they might say, we've only had one incident in the past few years. Would that be accurate or no?
Well, first of all, we don't know
Where
that that's
our remote assist, yeah, I guess you're right. There's only
no.
one documented from 3 years ago. If I'm Waymo, I would probably say, okay, this was 3 years ago. We weren't that good back then. We're much better now, obviously. And to be fair, they are doing much higher scale now. And I don't think there have been any kind of reported instance that we know about where remote assistants screwed up.
Oh, just wait. Wait, Harry, my paper's coming out. I have some really juicy data in the paper.
Okay.
Juicy, juicy, juicy that the world has not seen yet. So,
Got it. So you think
unfortunately,
this is still an issue, and it's mainly stemming from the fact that the operators are abroad and maybe not everything, but a large part of it could be fixed just by onshoring.
I think that when I release this paper, I mean the issues that we're seeing now, I think it's a combination of all of the above. You've got
Okay.
people, with long latencies. We're not sure how they're being trained, what kind of interfaces they're being trained
Yeah.
with, what kind of staffing models Waymo has.
So, I mean, Waymo did say that they are licensed, which they didn't clarify. I'm guessing they're either licensed in the US or they're licensed in the Philippines. But to be fair, I mean, you can have a foreign license, come to America, rent a car, and drive on our roads. Right? I don't know if, it maybe opens up questions of broader, I don't know if that should be allowed, but that is technically allowed, right?
Yes, but I'd like to remind everybody we're still talking about commercial operations.
Mm, true.
You cannot take your American driver's license, or let's say you're an air traffic controller. Just because you're an American air traffic controller does not give you the right to go into the Philippines air traffic control tower and control their planes.
True.
It the assumption that just because you have a driver's license in any English speaking country gives you
Hmm.
the right to drive anywhere else, particularly remotely. No, that is absolutely not true. And indeed, I have been advocating for a long time that even if you have a regular driver's license, that's not enough. You need to have
I'm with
special.
you on that. I mean, there was obviously this big story in San Francisco, this elderly woman, 92, killed a family of four, and I think the DA didn't even charge her, and there was a lot of outrage. I guess, like, to me, I sometimes, like, where I push back on a lot of Waymo safety arguments is that I really would like to, like, this seems like a good opportunity. Hey, not only are, operators licensed, but we actually hold them to a higher standard. We want California to start, if you get to a certain, like, it may not be popular, but I guess to me, like, we know there are a lot of things you can do to reduce road deaths now. I sort of see Waymo only propping up their solution as the only solution. We know there's a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, and I think that look, the reality is that like airline dispatchers, like truck dispatchers, commercial dispatchers, they all have to have different licenses.
Yeah.
And they are not just because I have a driver's license. It shows you when you are a professional person who moves vehicles around, whether we're talking
Hmm.
about air traffic controller, dispatchers, you have to have a license and you have to have standardized training. We need that in self-driving. Waymo
Gotcha.
doesn't want me to say that because they hear dollar signs when I say that,
Yeah.
and they're right. But the reality is that if you're at that place, the only way that you're going to engender public trust is if your people get licensed in the same way that every other person who's doing similar
Hmm.
jobs around the world gets licensed.
Got it. So I guess when it comes to sort of the best practices for remote assistance, it sounds like onshoring is at the top of your list, better than existing licenses and training. Is there anything else that you think kind of goes into
Well, you'll
that?
have to wait and read the paper because it
All
kind of it
right, you're
kind of
really hyping up this paper. I'll
yeah. Well, I
definitely
think
read it,
I
but
should have. I feel bad because I should have written it ages ago. Like I'm the one person in the world. There's not very many of us. I mean, maybe two that have researched really in depth how to
hmm.
design remote operations for drones, and then also looking at the same problem
Yeah,
for self-driving cars.
gotcha.
It's not a common Venn diagram, but
Yeah.
AI is the key enabler in both of those circles. And so this is actually where, I'm not a Luddite. There are some
Hmm.
great things we can use AI to do, uh,
Cool.
for example, in training, to improve training.
Got it. So Waymo also announced this term. I don't think I've heard of it until last week, Event Response Team, or ERT. And they say this is basically their remote assistance, but they are exclusively based in the US and they're certified for more complex tasks like coordinating with emergency responders and managing post-collision protocols. I think this was sort of, I think what generated that, we posted this guest post from John, who used to work at Cruise, and other folks on the Driverless Digest that you commented on. And I think this is, what he was essentially arguing is that, Waymo and other companies likely have tiered, whether it's customer support or remote assistance. Like, I think there's a pretty basic business
Mhm.
principle for more, even believe it or not, I used to be an aerospace engineer, and I think we had tier one customers, that would get a little better support, and tier two, the guys that were paying less and out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what that
So
says
true.
about airplanes, but I think they were literally called tier one and tier two. So, what do you think about that? I mean, they didn't release a whole lot of details beyond that, but I mean, I guess that makes sense, right? To have two teams.
Well, not surprising. I've done a lot of research on that. And, it, you can have several different architectures of remote
Mm-hmm.
operators. You can have basically they are having a dedicated remote operation, a set of remote operators that do one functionality,
Yep.
uh, as opposed to the jack of all trades people that can do all. And
Mm-hmm.
there's some pros and cons to that. You're more flexible if one person can do everything, but you actually then are probably less efficient if you have a lot more of one kind of operation. So
Yeah.
I don't have any issues with the way Waymo is doing different tiered responses. We don't know because we don't have the level of insight that we do, say, for Cruise after the dragging of the pedestrian in San
Mm-hmm.
Francisco. The Quinn and Manuel report came out. We got a lot of insight into their remote operations. And it was clear that there were design decisions that were made incorrectly. There was no big red button inside of their remote operation center to be able to
Mm.
stop the car in case anything bad really happened. So there were just a lot of problems, which I chalk up to two things: nascent technology and a rush to get a technology deployed, a rush to be the first. And, we see this with Waymo, though, now, too. Waymo's under intense fiscal pressure and they have got to perform. And so I think that we are seeing some of the shortcuts like the event response teams, yes, but Waymo has not responded to Senator Markey's request for details. So we don't know exactly what tasks are handled by the Philippine operators and what
Gotcha.
tasks are handled by the ERTs.
So I guess the follow-up question there would be, what's the reason, like, why should Waymo have to provide that? I think John in our piece was kind of arguing more of an outcome. Obviously, he kind of worked in the industry, so maybe it's fair, but, he was arguing for an outcome based, which I was sympathetic to that, hey, if we don't screw up, let us do our thing. I don't know if that's the best strategy to regulation, but I think there's some, there's something there. So what's the sort of balance? Because I know there's a lot of state versus federal regulation, and I think with AV technology, I think it is. I'm very sympathetic to Waymo's argument that they don't want to have to deal with 50 different states regulating this technology and all the other parts. But curious what you think there.
Well, so we just opened up a new robotics center in Fairfax. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, Arlington, Virginia. And it actually wasn't even fully opened yet. And then a robotics professor did the great sin of left a LiPo battery plugged in too long by itself. The battery caught fire
Mm-hmm.
and nearly burned the place down.
Yikes.
It was brand new. And so it didn't burn the place down. The fire system was high end, very expensive, mandated by regulation, and
Mm-hmm.
it shut the fire down very quickly. And it turned out we only lost one room of equipment, whereas we could have lost the whole building. So I
Yeah.
like to tell people I was never more grateful that we followed the regulations in that sense, right? Just because you think that you haven't screwed up and you haven't screwed
Mm-hmm.
up yet, somehow you think that that means you won't, and you're gonna. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, for people who want to have transparency and public trust, knowing that there's a set of common guidelines and rules and regulations that you have to follow. I mean, this is why we believe in our air traffic control system.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, when it's highly regulated, as we saw with the DC crash, that the system can still fail us. It is never a good idea to say just because we haven't screwed up doesn't mean we won't. And I would
Gotcha.
actually go back and say, And the debacle that happened in San Francisco with the power outage
Yeah.
showed they did screw up.
I do think that this kind of coming on the heels of that, I was pretty critical actually talking about our friend Brad from Forbes. I had him on my podcast, and he's been a big booster of Waymo. I think even both of us were sort of saying we'd like to see more data. What the heck happened in that situation? And I guess it does. I mean, it seems like having more data and transparency. I think that would be a good thing here. Like, what tasks are is who or what doing, right? I think that's basically what we not want to know. And Waymo has released not that yet.
Look, nobody wants to have somebody in their back seat all the time. When I became a single seat
They
pilot,
don't want a senator grilling them in front of Congress. Yeah, I don't think that's my top choice for a Friday.
I mean, I loved it when I graduated and flight school, and I could fly around by myself in the plane. I loved it, right? I loved
Hmm.
that autonomy that I had. But even in the end, even I still had to have an annual check ride
Yep.
because I was doing something that could cause somebody to die if I screwed up. And
Hmm.
so we need to be, we need to put those big boy pants on and say, look, I know it's going to cost more and it's a big pain,
Yeah.
except that what you get from that is the fact that then a public agency has said, we certified this group as safe enough to
Hmm.
perform, and the public go crazy, you can trust them.
So I think that might be the trade-off. I guess the main trade-off of using remote assistance in the Philippines, if you bring them back to America, it would be cost, right? The main downside of bringing them back, right? They're more expensive.
That's the only downside.
It's the only downside. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, I think there is an argument that, Waymo, like they're pretty early on in the stage. Like, I don't know if they need to be really looking to cut a lot of costs. Anytime you complain on a Waymo, they're like, oh, here's $40 for your next ride. Like they're clearly, obviously, they've had a lot of, I don't know, criticisms, but, there are a lot of questions around how expensive the cars are and, the commercialization of the service. So it does seem like, they could maybe they were a little aggressive with that strategy. I don't know if you have any thoughts. I mean, it's kind of more of a business decision, but I guess safety too. But
Well, I mean, the right safety choice is to bring the operators back home.
yeah.
There's no other choice.
And I
So,
mean, well,
yeah.
I guess I would imagine, I guess, like you said, we don't know. We don't know what operators are doing what tasks. So we kind of need to see from Waymo, like if they say, oh, here's what all the Philippine operators are doing, it's actually 75% of the calls are very simple. Like I've been parked for 5 minutes. I don't know what to do. I imagine like I would be okay with that. What do you think if it was pretty simple?
Maybe
Maybe.
um, if, but that starts to suggest then that there may be bigger problems. If you need to
Mm,
have all of those people in the Philippines for these continually occurring minor, quote unquote, minor problems, it makes me wonder, okay, well, what's really happening under the hood there? A 5 minute delay can be an
well,
eternity.
maybe not 5 minutes, but maybe 10, 20 seconds, right?
Okay, well, again, like, I think the thing is,
Yeah.
if the delays were really that, we wouldn't be talking about it here because we
Yeah.
wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't want to I'm sort of speculating a lot now, and I'm speculating because we don't know. Waymo hasn't released the data. And so I think you and I are both on the same page there. I think we want to see a little bit more about what's going on behind under the hood.
Definitely.
What do you think about the ratio that they mentioned, 70 remote assistants to a fleet size of 3,000 vehicles?
Well, I'm going to talk about it in my paper. You'll be happy to know. The military learned some really important lessons about that. It sounds good. It makes for good eye candy for the VC investors.
Hmm.
But is it really working? I don't think so. So whatever they think their right ratio is, and it's hard for me to comment more specifically until we know what that list of tasks are and what we
Yeah.
know the maximum latencies are that result from that. But the data that I'm going to show you in this paper is going to suggest it is not working.
Got it. Well, and I mean, the goal of, I guess, any AV player, right, is really to get that human intervention, or the number of operators or that ratio close to zero, right? They want as few human operators as possible for as many cars as possible. And so I think that is the goal. Do you think do you think that's okay? I mean, is it okay to have this system where, AVs are driving whatever percentage of the time and humans jump in here and there? Or should the goal be to get rid of human intervention? What do you think about that kind of mix there?
Well, let me just, as the robotics professor, let me put that hat on. Look,
Hmm.
there are no systems out there that work in the real world that don't have human supervision at some level. It is
Yeah.
truly rare to find an autonomous system. And everybody is loving these Chinese robots that are doing all the flips and, the Unitree robots. I got news for them. That is all that none of that is real AI in the sense that these are not autonomous robots. As soon as they're done with their shows, they can't think to get off the stage on their own.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of trickery that goes on in displaying your technology, your robotics technology to the public because you want more money. And so you're trying to make things cool. Again, as a person trying to get money as a professor, it's a game we play with our funders. But where I start to object to this is when, in their big statement, I guess last week or the week before, Waymo came out and said, we have fully autonomous cars. I mean,
Hmm.
we do need all these remote operators, but they are fully autonomous. I'm like, no, they're not.
Yeah.
No, like you can't say that you have a fully autonomous anything if you need even a modicum of human babysitting. So I think that there
Well, I mean,
is
it obviously sounds good for marketing and what
right,
should they call it then? Because it
right.
is pretty
It is
close, right?
it's semi-autonomous. Like, and I don't know if it's really close. Like, if
Yeah.
you need different tiers of different operators to get your cars to work in the world, that's not really that autonomous.
Got it.
It suggests to me that there's still a long, long way to go. Now, look, the military does not have fully autonomous drones.
Hmm.
Maybe like the closest drone that we have to that is the Global Hawk. The Global Hawk is amazing, but it's really got more automation than any AI, and it works amazingly, but it's also exceedingly expensive. Uh, all drones, other than that one, and even that one to some degree, they're semi-autonomous. They have to
Yeah.
have humans
Well,
coaching them
I
to
guess, is
work.
there anything wrong with semi-autonomous if the product works and they can make a business out of it? Yeah, I don't really have an issue
No,
with the fact that, yeah, I mean, that's fine. Whatever's safest, and great product.
that's actually the thing that annoys me about this. The Waymo is acting very cloak and dagger right now, even though they're
Hmm.
saying they're being transparent. And I would have, advised them ages ago, don't go this path. Go down the path of we are going to be a professional commercial transportation. American Airlines need dispatchers,
Yeah.
United needs dispatchers. We're going to have a similar kind of person working our tasks. We're going to try to get the cost down, but right now that's just what it takes to do a professional transportation company. Deal with it. And the investors would have been fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think AVs will ever be truly driverless 100% of the time?
Oh no. They've got a long way to go because of the need for remote operations. I mean,
Hmm.
humans are very much a part of their world. And then we have the issue of highway driving, which Waymo loves to sidestep. But this is the deal breaker. If no company can get highway driving to work at scale, then it'll never work. And that's because even with operators in the United States, the time latencies there are still too long, and you cannot wait for a remote operator to do some kind of change of the vehicle at highway speeds. Somebody's going to die. And Brad loves to say, oh, but Missy, they have some operations in San Francisco. They have
Los
very,
Angeles. I took a freeway ride here in Los Angeles. Didn't
they're
die.
very
Still here.
limited. Yeah, they're very limited and they're in very well mapped areas. And they probably have a bunch of people watching
Hmm.
each drive, which again, you're just not going to be able, you can do it, but and let me just take the step backwards. And you didn't even
Hmm.
ask me about end-to-end learning. One of the things that we know about end-to-end learning is that it hallucinates terribly and it hallucinates more dramatically at highway speeds. And so it's just not clear that that hurdle is going to be achievable to jump over. I'm not
Yeah.
saying we won't get there, but I don't see a path anytime soon.
Got it. So, wrapping up, I think this will be my last question for you, but put your regulator cap on for a second since you were a regulator. And what should maybe regulators, what should the public be looking at when evaluating Waymo's kind of safety record and remote assistant program going forward? I mean, if we go by crashes caused by remote assistance that we know about, I mean, there hasn't been any in a few years. So that might be a tough metric. Should it be kind of grilling them for more data like Senator Markey did, which I think we both thought was probably fair and would provide info? Or, what would be kind of your, maybe reasonable wish list that you think is in the realm of possibility?
Yeah, I think that because they are like airline dispatchers, that I think that we need to have more transparency about how they're trained, what their tasks are, what do regulators get to see, including the data about delays and the technologies that are needed. Like, so for example, I just mentioned it would be great if these operators had a delay clock
Yeah, that's a good idea.
counting, right? So that they understood, look, maybe I just won't give a command because it's too dangerous in the situation, and I will just wait for one more light cycle. And wouldn't
Yeah.
that be the right way to do it? So I think that we need more transparency. I don't think it's a big ask. I think in the end, it will help Waymo get to be where they want to be. I think fighting it and trying to pretend that, don't look at the man
Hmm.
behind the curtain, that is not going to be a good strategy for them.
Yeah. Well, and I think also probably like the idea you just mentioned, right? Having a little bit of a latency calculator or timeline on your screen. I think other companies. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't call it trade secrets, but it's like kind of safety best practices. And if I really cared about safety, I might, okay, yeah, maybe this is a little bit of our secret sauce, but like we want other companies to do this because it is the safest way to operate. And in a way, I think the AV industry is, kind of a whole, right? Like they are competitors, but they also kind of don't want, another cruise type situation to happen, right? I mean, that's really what the general public remembers. Whenever Waymos screw up, people text me about that. They don't text me about, other stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, and I don't mean to sound like I'm all over Waymo. Again,
Mhm.
Waymo was the first out of the gate that was successful.
I
Cruise was
mean,
not
yeah,
successful, right? So Cruise, Waymo just unfortunately carries that burden on their shoulders that they're setting the pace for the entire community. That's the cost of being first,
yeah.
but the reward of being first is you're first.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. And Dr. Cummings, really appreciate you coming on the Digest podcast. I know we've got a lot of Waymo people that listen, so I'm sure they will be eagerly awaiting and enjoying this episode. I follow you on LinkedIn. I like seeing everything that you post there. We'll leave a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Is there anything else where you're publishing or where people can follow you? You mentioned a paper that's coming out. We can
Yep.
definitely link to that when
So
that's out.
I'll post it on
I
LinkedIn as
heard
soon as
you
that
have a
comes
paper coming
out.
out.
So don't worry. I don't like to tease without following up with some kind of deliverable.
All right. Awesome. Excellent. Well, Dr. Cummings, appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.